So hello and welcome.
Hello.
And welcome to all our viewers. This is one of our artists who is currently showing in our exhibition, Mirror to the World. Her name is Doris Ettlinger. So sorry. But today we will look over some of her artistic process, and she will tell us about some of her works that is currently showing in our gallery. Today we're just gonna start off with a really simple question. How are you today?
Good.
That's nice. So would you mind telling us and the viewers about yourself, a little about your background, and how did you first start to be interested in art? How did you got into this role?
Okay. Well, I grew up on Staten Island, and I had a comfortable upbringing, and I have 4 brothers. And so being the only girl gave me kind of a special status in the house. And they became engineers, whereas I, being interested in art, it was okay if I pursued art. Because if they had wanted to be artists, I'm sure they would have been discouraged. But I was shy, and in grade school, I started to get positive feedback from my classmates about my drawing, and like to draw faces. I've always loved to draw faces. And so that just made me want to improve my skills. And yeah, so when I was in 7th grade, I remember we were given a literature textbook that was, I mean, it was like this thick, and there were no pictures in it. And I was not happy about that. So we were reading A Tale of Two Cities by Dickens. And so I started to draw the characters the way I imagined them. And my classmates just loved that, to see what Madame Defarge looked like, and that kind of. And so little did I know at that time that I would grow up and become an illustrator. And that's what I would do. I would imagine characters. And so I then went, I had a lot of encouragement from my mother, who had wanted to go to Pratt after high school, but because of the Depression, had to go right to work. And so she was very encouraging with me. And I eventually went to Rhode Island School of Design, and a very solid education in illustration. So got a good start.
I would say so. So looking at your works, do you mind telling us more about the connection between you and your works, and how do you usually choose what to paint regarding your subjects?
Well, as an illustrator, I would always be given assignments, and I love to be a problem solver and do research and such. And it occurred to me recently that in my teaching of watercolor, I would get, my students would give suggestions of things that they would like to learn how to paint, or a technique they would like to learn. And that was a little like getting an assignment. And so I would rise to the challenge and do the research and look for reference and that sort of thing. And so in the course of then using this new technique, or looking at this new subject matter, or exploring it a little more, it would inevitably become mine, from the way I would approach it or design it. Or so I'm usually drawn to nature, or people I know. So those are my usual subjects. During the pandemic, we talked about how we couldn't travel. And so my Zooming students, we decided that we should share our travel pictures, and that would be our subject matter. So that was fun to paint scenes in Scotland and Florida and lots of other places. But I find that the images from places where I've never been are not as meaningful to me as places that I have a connection to.
Mhm. Why watercolor? I know that you said that you started out as illustrator. When you were doing illustration, when you just started out, were you using watercolor at then, or is there other medium materials you were using?
I like to, in the very beginning, when I was still putting my portfolio together, I like to mix media, but I never liked acrylic and oil. I couldn't quite get a handle on it. To me, I later learned a technique with oil that suited me better, but at that time, oil was just too messy. And
Mhm.
I preferred to work at my drawing board and work small. And
Mhm.
so I would use watercolor, but often I would use it just to color in. I wasn't really taking advantage of the medium. So it was only later I started to see what watercolor could do. And at the time
Mhm.
I went to art school, my mother finally got a chance to study art and
Mhm.
began studying watercolor. So I never studied watercolor in a classroom at
Mhm.
RISD, but I'd see what my mother was painting. And at that time, I was kind of a, know it all and kind of a twerp. I'm going to art school and you're in watercolor lessons. So she would talk about something she was doing. And I say, oh, yeah, that's really nice. And
Mhm.
it was only later I appreciated her more. And she was very skilled. And eventually, in a very short period of time, she had a gallery on Staten Island that was selling her work. She was showing
Mhm.
it as she was taking classes at the Art Students League. She was winning awards at shows in Manhattan. So I would just glean little bits of tips from her and see how she worked. And she had a wonderful touch and great sense of color. And
Mhm.
so by watching what she did, I was able to see what watercolor could do. And she had
Mhm.
shared with me books by people she admired.
Mhm.
So I eventually studied those books.
Mhm.
So leading right into, I was really getting involved with picture books by then. And I was looking at the work of Jean Dobie, and she wrote a book called Making Color Sing.
Mhm.
And she talks about layering pure pigment of transparent color.
Mhm.
And that book changed my illustration work because
Mhm.
I was laying down a thin wash of a transparent yellow. And then when that would dry, I would then do a glaze of a transparent pink, but letting some of the white paper and yellow show through. And
Mhm.
then I would do a glaze of cobalt blue,
Mhm.
and where they all overlapped, it became a neutral. So
Mhm.
I was mixing color on the paper, almost like laying colored glass on top of each other.
Mhm.
And it's a wonderful way to unify a composition right from the get-go. And once I
Mhm.
had these layers of color, then I could go in with more color with colored pencil and develop my
Mhm.
illustration. And so that book was very important to me. And they came out with an anniversary edition a few
Oh.
years ago. So it's still in
Mhm.
print, and I highly recommend it. And then the other watercolorist whose work influenced me is Charles Reed, who just died last year.
Mhm.
And he is a very well-known illustrator, and
Mhm.
uh, he influenced my mother's work quite a bit. And when he painted flowers, they were just all over the place. They were just so fresh. And he would also use a lot of pure pigment in a totally different way.
Mhm.
And so um, between the two of them, I kind of arrived at a style I liked.
Well, I know that you just introduced me some of the artists that influenced you and your work. And I was just wondering, since if I'm correct, your mother is also an artist, Do you think she also influenced you quite a lot on your way?
Oh, yeah,
Mhm.
very much so. And as I got older, I appreciated her more and more. And what's interesting was she eventually developed dementia, but it wasn't Alzheimer's. It was just short-term memory issues. But she couldn't paint anymore. She wasn't, I even sat down with her. She lost the facility to make a stroke. But I could show her something I was working on, and she would immediately say, well, it really works over here, but I would take that dark and I would continue it down this way.
Mhm.
And so she hadn't lost her critical eye, and I thought that was interesting. But she
Mhm.
later in life, before her dementia, her compositions were becoming more abstract, and she was doing
Mhm.
things that Mike referred to as color explosions, where she would do these florals, and she would visualize it before she painted it. She said, I can look at the paper and see it.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
she'd just do these incredible florals.
That's wonderful to hear. Certainly, I believe that whether it's our family or people who's been with us along the way certainly influence either it's us as a person or even our works.
Mhm.
So during your process with creating your artwork, what process do you think is the most difficult part? When you start to conceptualize something that you want to paint, which part is the most difficult for you, do you think?
I would say starting and finishing. Starting, if I'm doing something where I'm teaching, I'm on the spot, I'm doing a
Mhm.
demo, I just jump right in and
Mhm.
hope for the best. If it's I will make myself, when I was illustrating and I was doing a book, it was very hard to
Mhm.
get started, because
Mhm.
starting with the blank page, very hard.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I would give myself 10 minutes to do a thumbnail, and I mean thumbnail like this big, envisioning, whatever would pop into my mind for the page or the spread.
Mhm.
And I would just give myself 10 minutes and I just draw and keep going. That was a good way to
Mhm.
get my feet wet. And
Mhm.
surprisingly, a few of the finished pieces would look a lot like those initial thumbnails.
Oh.
So that was for illustration. And then with the watercolor, I find that I don't have a problem starting, but I have a pile of paintings that are not finished. I'm always moving on to something new. So sometimes for my classes, I'll just say, okay, next week we're going to finish some paintings.
Mhm.
And so we'll talk about what a painting needs. And
Mhm.
so that helps me a lot, as well
Mhm.
as the students.
When I look into your work, and of course, prior to our interview, I've read your statement, and I know that transparency is something that you value a lot in your work. And I know that you try not to overwork your pieces. And I was just wondering, is there a reason for you to choose such an approach to creating your pieces?
Well, watercolor is meant to have light pass through the
Mm-hmm.
paint and hit the paper and then bounce back. So if it gets too muddy and overworked, the
Mm-hmm.
pigments are disturbed and you don't get that clarity
Mm-hmm.
and that sparkle in the painting. Also, I like to paint in a way where if if two things are adjacent and the values are similar, I
Mm-hmm.
like to have the color lead into the adjacent area.
Mm-hmm.
And then in another part of the object, let's say it's a flower, I
Mm-hmm.
want a hard edge. So I want to combine hard hard edges with edges that just melt away.
Mm-hmm.
And So sometimes when people keep working on a piece, they'll make the elements too discrete, and the elements start to look pasted on. So you want to get this flow from the object to the background. And so it kind of unifies the painting in that way. But the main thing about overworking is you just end up with mud. And there are things you can do to fix that, where you can glaze it with an intense staining color and revive it a bit, but it's never going to have that sparkle that the initial transparent wash would have. Also, I tell my students, if you think you made a mistake, don't try to fix it right away. I see people getting tissues out and blotting it up. Oh no. And you have to you have to partner with watercolor. I read some watercolorist compared watercolor and oil and said oil paintings like working with a dog. They sit and the dogs will sit. But with watercolor, it's more like cats. You have to suggest and just see what the cat wants to do and have that also be what you want. And I think that's a good analogy. So yeah, you don't want to over control the watercolor. And on the topic of overworking and knowing when to stop, I was just reading in one of Charles Reed's books that he knows it's time to stop when he gets this wave of weariness coming over him. It's like, oh, do I really want to go into that corner of the painting? And that's when you should just leave it. And also, I feel like you should always, like I say, I have a stack of unfinished paintings, but I do recommend stopping before you feel like you're completely done, because that way you can avoid overworking. And what I tell everyone is just leave it. Especially if you think you've made mistakes and you want to go back, just leave it overnight. And what I say is the fairies will work on it. And so, because you'll look at a painting in the morning or a few days later and you'll think, oh, I think that works. I don't think that's so bad. And I don't think I need to do anything else. So it's really what the fairies are, is really looking at something with fresh eyes and changing your attitude.
Certainly, referring to what you just said, I completely understand what you meant by oil painting. Some people refer it as more of a dog. I actually graduated with an art degree recently, and I would say I was efficient, or I majored in oil painting. Watercolor has always been my biggest nightmare. I cannot control watercolor. It's very terrifying. So I know that, of course, you started out as illustrator and now you do watercolor with fine arts. And then I understand that you're also teaching studios, on the third floor.
Yeah,
and you also have a YouTube channel, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I had started posting a few time-lapse videos that I take of my process. But what really kicked off the YouTube channel was the pandemic, because I was Zooming my classes. And so I had my phone, I have my iPad, and then I have my phone positioned over my drawing board. And so I was able to record my process, and teaching on Zoom. I'm essentially doing a 2-hour demo several times a week. So I then had the recording from the Zoom session as raw material to edit and turn into my YouTube videos. So, the pandemic was very good for me in that regard.
Well, as you just said, I think you are wearing so many different hats in your career of being an artist. And I was just wondering, at this point in your career, is there anything else, whether it's the medium or any style that you want to try out? Is there anything on your mind that you want to just try more in your career right now?
Well, I'd like to do some more personal work because the work I do with my classes kind of takes up so much of my time.
Of
And
course.
I get commissions to do portraits or dog portraits or
Mhm.
landscapes. And anyway, so that takes up time too. So when do I get time to do personal work? I would love to do more portraits.
Mhm.
And I did one of my nieces, and it was very exciting to do. And I owe Mike a portrait because he did, during the pandemic, I challenged Mike to do, that is Mike McFadden, to do,
Mhm.
we should do portraits of each other. So he did 4 collage portraits of me. And
Oh.
I did a sketch of him, but I still have to do a portrait of him.
Mhm.
Did he show you the portrait of me that he
I
did?
don't think so, but it sounds very lovely.
Yeah, it was, anyway, I have it right here. I'll have to show it to you. Anyway, so I like to do more portraits. I like to do some more paintings that have a little more a narrative to them or suggestion of a story. I thought about doing a series about the children in our neighborhood, not just the children
Mhm.
who live here now, but children from, like
Mhm.
100 years ago and that kind of
Mhm.
thing, and just kind of set up a scene. And in a way, that would be a hybrid between my watercolors and my illustration is something
Mhm.
with more of a narrative. I
Mhm.
did this painting. Just hold on. I was commissioned to do a dog portrait, and then the person said, "Oh, I changed my mind," and I had already drawn the dog, and that's why I always make sure I get a deposit. So I drew the dog. So I thought, well, I've already drawn him. I might as well paint him.
Mhm.
So
Oh, that's lovely. It's
I
very
have
beautiful.
some light there. So I decided to do the dog
Mhm.
anyway and include this little girl in our neighborhood named
Mhm.
Amma who loves dogs, but she's very tentative around this very big dog. So this is a scene in our neighborhood and
Mhm.
the little girl Amma. And I'd like to do some more things with the kids, and I think that would be interesting. So that's what I'm thinking about. Oh, I want to do larger paintings because the new
Mhm.
website, and it's a
Mhm.
FASO website, and that allows you to look at and see what your paintings would look like in a room, which I think
Mhm.
is so amazing. But my
Mhm.
paintings look so small in these little rooms. So I'd like to do some larger paintings also. So
Mhm.
those are my plans.
Mhm. I agree. Well, your paintings are small, but then they're very delicate. I've seen
Thank you.
them in a gallery by myself. They're very beautiful. The
Thank
transparency
you.
and everything, even the details. So thank you for showing us your work just now. I'm
Mhm.
wondering, is there anything else you're working on right now? What's the piece that you're working on right now?
Right now, I'm framing up a lot of very small pieces for a pop-up art sale in Princeton. So we'll see how that
Mhm.
goes. I have some recent work here. This is a floral. I like a challenge. So this was Queen Anne's lace. Let's see if you can see this. I didn't know Queen Anne's lace came in colors, but they do. And
Mhm.
so this was a matter of some negative painting and
Mhm.
using some whitewash. And that's another
Mhm.
thing I'm going to be doing more of. I'd like to introduce some opaque, now that we've been talking about how transparent my work is. I'd like to switch things up.
Mhm.
And looking at John Singer Sargent, who is another hero of mine, if you look at his watercolors, he'll use crayon and wash and all kinds of things. It's all about the painting, not about any strict rules. So
Mhm.
I used some introduced gouache. So here I was doing some negative painting. I also
Mhm.
used a little mask in here too. I did some negative painting. And so I was thinking, well, I should really go up here and finish this off.
Mhm.
And then I thought about what I had just read in the Charles Reed book about that wave of weariness, because
Mhm.
I looked here and I thought, oh, I don't know if I want to keep doing this sort of thing up here. And I think if I had done that, it would have been kind of a boring painting. So that's a recent piece. Oh, I went to visit a friend in Seattle, and her brother has a chicken farm at east of Seattle. And we went there, and so I was photographing the chickens, the free range chickens. And so I had a lot of fun with this. I'm calling this one, well, I was either calling it a handsome chicken or free range. And so they have a lot of.
Well, do you usually work from photographs, or do you paint in plein air?
This started out as plein air. This is a view. This is the view we have from the other side of the mill, looking out over the Musconetcong River. And let's see, there's like coming through the Venetian blinds. That's why I'm holding it back here. And so I like to paint outside if the weather is perfect. I'm not one of. I think plein air paintings become a bit like the Iron Man competition. It's like, get out there, fight those mosquitoes, or, use an umbrella. And so it was a pleasant place to paint. So this, it was very hard to paint moving water. And so I have a small sketch of this that was painted purely plein air, but then I painted this inside with a photo. And so the water stood still, but I feel like it still looks like it's moving. So when I paint outside, I tell myself I'm out here for the pleasure of the experience. Let's see if this. So this was painted outside. Here's a purely plein air painting. And this is looking in a different direction from the river. And my neighbor lives in a beautiful old stone house. And I think of her property as my muse. I've done so many paintings of her house, and I have to tell her, you don't have to buy this painting. This is, but she could have a show of my work with what I've done. Anyway, so this was
it's wonderful.
A painting I did with my students. So anyway,
how long?
Well,
how long?
Go on and on with that whole stack. Here's some turkeys at the chicken farm. I call this "Pardon the Turkeys." So, anyway, and this is my studio. I'll just unplug my iPad here, and I'm going to just turn my camera around. So this is the library.
Wow.
And I've always wanted a library, so I have a lot. I also wanted a laundry chute. I don't have a laundry chute, but I do have a library. And here's some vultures I painted. That was in the few shows. There's a portrait of me at 13. And then here's my studio. Wow. So I don't have the lights on because I didn't want it backlighting me. That's but I have a beautiful big bulletin board here. And then years ago, Mike made me flat shelves, which are great. And then my supplies. And there's my watercolor brushes, etc. And my tabaret, my desk, my light table. And this is a painting by my mother, that geranium up there. That's one of her paintings. And I have more of her work upstairs. And then, and Mike made me this boom. You can see, I have to pull it down, hold on. He made me this for Zooming.
Wow.
So, isn't that great? So I can put the camera, or rather the phone, in that clamp, and that's right over my drawing board.
Wow.
And so I Zoom every Wednesday night now. Now my Tuesday classes are in person. Now I'm going to turn this around again. Go back to the library. Oh, got to turn this light out. And it's so interesting how different it is to teach in person, because now that I teach in person again, I'm not getting as much painting done. But it's nice to be able to look at someone's painting and point to something and say, this is what I'm talking about. It's so hard to point with Zoom.
Of course. Wow, the studio is beautiful. There's so many artworks in there.
Yeah, thank you. And so on the third floor, we live on the second floor, and on the third floor is a half of it has been insulated, and that's where I have a big long work table that Mike made me, and I can fit 8 people comfortably, and that's where I have my classes. So we have a lot.
That's so lovely, having so many things in life and like having so many experience and then teaching that to, you know, your students. And wow.
Yeah, and I can just keep, I never had to think about retiring. When we had our children, Mike was supporting us and I was working as an illustrator, but at a certain point I couldn't. But then I didn't have to, I slowly got back into illustrating, and I didn't have to say, oh, am I going to be a stay-at-home mom or go to work? I could work at home for my whole career.
Of course, Michael was also telling me about his career and how he transitioned and became like an artist. And he also told me how you both will ask each other opinions about your own work, and it was really helpful for him deciding where to go next in his work. I think it was lovely.
People remark on how different our work is,
Yes.
but it doesn't mean we can't appreciate a different style or work. So I'm his biggest fan, but I tried to work in an abstract way at different times in my life, and it just didn't click for me. But I can still look at his work and say, I'm not sure about this over here, and maybe you need more contrast, or he's more likely to say that to me. He'll say, you need more contrast.
Yeah, he was also just telling me how big of a fan he is with contrast and colors.
Yeah. So we were very lucky to have each other during the pandemic. We got a lot of painting done, and now it's, now there's so many shows to enter and things that's picked up so much. We're so busy. We're looking forward to January. I think things will settle down then.
Oh, I hope so.
But I also do workshops that are just 5-hour workshops on different themes or techniques. So I'm busy dreaming up what I'm going to do in the new year. And I think my first one will be about crows, rooks, and ravens. I think I'm going to do a workshop on that. And then I'll do one on winter landscapes.
It sounds very exciting. So this is going to be my last question, but lastly, you have a lot of experience, and I think younger generations such as myself, it's always very helpful and very interesting to hear some insight or even just advice from artists. So do you think you have any advice for people or for our viewers who's trying to also get into the art world or trying to become an artist themselves? Do you think you have any advice for them?
Well, even if you're a fine artist, you have to be a business person. I know people who are under 40 are much better, I think, with social media and technology, and I've been trying. So the most important thing as a business person is to be a good communicator with your client. Really respect deadlines and have a day job. Because when I started out as an illustrator, you could make a living as an illustrator. It's much harder now. I don't. There are many reasons for that, but I found that my business model as a fine artist is to meet as many people as possible,
Mhm.
because you never know who's going to really respond to your work and buy something or
Mhm.
take one of your classes. I think if you have the opportunity to teach, I really recommend that, because
Mhm.
you'll be, talking about art, and you'll be learning just
Mhm.
as your students are learning. And
Mhm.
also I find that my students will very often buy my art. So it comes full circle. Learning how to do watercolor, if I was going to coach someone on or advise someone who's just getting into watercolor, I would say start by just enjoying yourself and not
Mhm.
try to control it too much. So
Mhm.
start with just playing with the color, letting it blend on the page,
Mhm.
spatter it, spritz it, just let it do what it wants to do. And once
Mhm.
you understand its behavior, then you can think about how you can use it in your work.
Mhm. Mhm.
You mentioned that I wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
I think of it as having a lot of revenue streams. So, try something out. Right now, I have an Etsy shop. I've had one for
Mhm.
about 9 or 10 years. And
Wow.
I don't sell a lot of stuff because I haven't, it's all about getting people to go there or
Mhm.
having the right tags for the search engine.
Mhm.
And I find all this fascinating, but it's all very time consuming. So
Mhm.
you have to then sit back and look at your different revenue streams, see which stream is a trickle and which one is really flowing nicely.
Mhm.
And so that's where you can put your attention, and then maybe that one will dry up and you can move back into one of the other revenue streams. Yeah. So
Mhm.
but the great thing about being an artist is that most artists are flexible. And so just as I described these different streams, you can change your focus throughout your life, and you never want to be doing the same thing for your whole life.
Mhm. Thank you so much for telling us that about your experience and everything. And I do not have any more questions for you right now, but if there's anything else you want to share with us, or if there's anything else that's still lingering in your mind, feel free to share. Um,
Okay, well, I've enjoyed our conversation. I can't think of anything else. I think we covered quite a bit.
Mhm,
But,
mhm, mhm.
anyway, all right.
Well,
And, I'm delighted to be part of the show.
well, it's our pleasure to have you in our show.
Oh, good, good. And the pieces that I picked out for the show, except for one, I think they've all won awards in the Garden State Watercolor Society
Mhm,
or another show. So they were some of my best older pieces.
mhm, mhm. Certainly, I hope more people can actually come in person and see them, with their own eye. It's very
Mhm.
different in person, seeing
Yes.
artworks. Again, thank you, Doris, for letting us interview you and sharing your insight about a lot of things, with us. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, Christina. Very nice talking with you. Bye bye.